Hello, everyone. I'm going to make a request. I would ask that everyone who sees this, either on my personal channel or on Looking Forward, spread it. Put it on your own feed, put it on Facebook. Ask your friends to watch it and to continue spreading it. I say this because from a real physical, real life perspective, I can't imagine having many things more important than this conversation, and I'd like other people to engage in it. About 20 years ago, I appeared on a local cable channel in Schenectady, New York, called Channel 16, I believe it was. They broadcast an hour-long lecture I gave on an Earth Day on the end of fossil fuels, and I wasn't talking about climate change. I was talking about us running out of fossil fuels. And there were a lot of people at that time who were concerned in a thing called peak oil. And there were considered to be 100,000 serious peak oil people in the United States, and there were hundreds of thousands of others that were concerned, and people were making arrangements, were attempting to prepare for peak oil. Many scientists predicted that peak oil was coming shortly at that point using present extraction techniques, and there was concern. I actually was an optimist at the time. I engaged in a long-distance correspondence with Dr. Heinberg at University of California, exchanged a few emails. He was a pessimist. He thought we were pretty much doomed. And I did not. Fast forward. For those who don't know, on Earth there are about 65,000 oil fields of various sizes. Of those, less than 40 are supergiant fields, and for our purposes we're going to define supergiant fields as being fields that have 4 billion plus barrels in proven reserves. Then there are giant fields. Now there are less than 1,500 of them, and those are fields that produce 1 billion to 4 billion barrels of oil in proven reserves, or did. Then there are large fields which produce 500 million to 1 billion barrels, and then there are just run-of-the-mill garden variety backyard oil fields. 94% of all the oil that we know of in the world is contained in giant and supergiant oil fields. Since the year 2010, only a handful of new giant oil fields have been discovered. Almost all of them were in deep waters. At the same time, 65% of giant and supergiant oil fields are in some level of decline. Technologies are being used, for example, pumping large amounts of water into the wells to raise oil that otherwise can't be reached by the piping. Those are a trade. You trade more oil now for a much more rapid decline later. And in order to prevent panic, which, let's face it, none of us want panic, a number of things have been done. Public-facing conversations on the topic have been, changed. For example, quite often now you'll see references to liquids when they're talking about fuels rather than petroleum. And that allows them to include liquefied coal reserves and liquefied natural gas into the total they're giving you. Even oil itself, even petroleum itself, now includes tight oil and heavy oil and other forms of oil from shale and tar sands and so forth things that wouldn't have been included when they were talking about oil, say, in 1980. 100 years ago, it took the energy equivalent of 1 barrel of oil to drill another 100 barrels of oil, a tremendous rate of return. Today, right now, it takes about 15 barrels of oil to drill another 100 barrels of oil. This week, a very concerning paper came out from a group of French scientists. They're looking at rates of decline, they're looking at all sorts of things, and they're pretty clear that by 2025, 4 years from now, it will take about 25 barrels of oil to drill another 100 barrels of oil. And the terrifying number is that by 2050, it will take about 50 barrels of oil to drill 100 barrels of oil. And after that, the decline becomes precipitous. A large part of what they are counting as proven reserves are very, very difficult to drill, very, very difficult to recover. When you recover, for example, tar sands, yes, you recover oil, you separate things out, you create enormous permanent lakes of deadly chemicals that you've extracted from the oil. And all of that is very energy intense. You need to apply heat. You need to do other things. Therefore, recovering a barrel of heavy oil from tar sands is expensive in terms of energy. Other things are even more expensive in terms of energy. All sorts of methods are being used to mask this. As I mentioned, the changing of words in many official documents, that's one method. Using more and more unconventional oil feedstock is another method. Using products, synthetic oil being an example, which are not exactly oil-based, as your parents or mine or me when I was young would have expected. Using more and more newer extraction technologies that get more oil out of declining wells quickly, but will not prevent them from finishing their decline. Covering supply jolts and sudden changes as either being politically related, it's the premier, it's the president, it's the king, or simply being the effects of the market, which we've been taught to think are absolutely magical, although it's not. Then the question comes, what happens if we let this run its course? If we allow this to run its course until 2050, enjoying a temporary false sense of security that we're lulled into, we can expect, should we live so long after 2050, the following. We should expect extreme increases in inequality, and nothing will stop them at that point. If you think they can be stopped politically, you're wrong. They will be extreme, and they will make present-day America look like total equity. Possibly more, but my estimate is about 3 billion human beings starving to death. Because remember, we also use petroleum products for various agricultural purposes, not just running our tractors. You can actually do that on solar. But other things like, for example, fertilizer. Resource wars, particularly between third world countries, some of which now have nuclear weapons, and they certainly, and if God help us, if it started between China and either India or Russia, this could easily lead to World War III and wipe out the human race. But barring that, we could still expect the loss of modern comforts, technologies, and medicine for most inhabitants, even in the first world where we live. It's not going to stop at our border. When it reaches a certain point, it will be the whole world. There will be a new normal that we would not recognize, and it doesn't need to be. If we are to survive and continue our growth as a species, we must, immediately, now, provide overwhelming pressure on all governments and all parties within every government. You're not protected if you're from a particular political party. You're not protected by your political views. Nothing protects you except action. All governments, all parties, all politicians, all royalty must be pressured immediately, not for short-term solutions, not for, oh, lower my gas prices now, release gas from the reserve of England or the United States or wherever. No. The pressure has to be that while there is a little time left, as little as it is, we transition to alternatives. Now, there is a panacea of energy products that we've discovered in the last 5 years. They need to be deployed. It doesn't matter how many trillions of dollars it costs. It does not matter. Not here, not anywhere in the world. Global stability is our stability. We need to deploy every new technology. We need to deploy the alternatives we have already started to deploy at a faster rate. We need to guarantee microgeneration. We need to cut out, force out, or otherwise eliminate by whatever means are necessary those who presently are pushing for more of the same standard operating procedure. It doesn't matter who they are. If they're politicians, they need to go. If they're billionaires who own the oil industry, they need to go, or at least be depowered to the point where what they think does not matter. And lastly, we need to personally transform, to whatever degree we can, our own lives, not just for greater energy efficiency. We need to move toward having microgeneration. We need to move toward having a future. We need to insist on these things at every level, our own, the government's, and the world's. Because trust me, again, things don't stop at the border. If you haven't seen that with COVID, you haven't seen anything. Having borders, even if we get our microgeneration up, even if we get alternatives out, the wars won't stop at our borders if the rest of the world collapses. The world has to be saved. And I know America is sick of hearing that. We're the only people who can do it. And we need to do it. And we need to watch out. Because when we start pushing for those things, the elites that are fascists, and there are more of them than I would have ever believed, will try to use a divide and conquer strategy to take over permanently and let us become the victims of the extreme inequality that is coming. You don't want that. No one, if they're honest and thinks about it, wants that. No one. You want your freedom. You want your rights. You want those things, and you want to have something resembling the life you have now. Fight. It's the only option there is. I am serious about this. I was serious 20 years ago when we had lots of time, and I thought the people talking rational sense would win the day. They didn't. I am serious about this now. We no longer have an enormous amount of time. We must make use of the time we have. America has been and is a great country, the greatest in the world. It has enormous natural resources from sea to shining sea. We must rise to this challenge. If we do not rise to this challenge, our grandchildren will have nothing. And that's something I say often because it matters to me. If we will not act, those who care nothing for their own deaths and those who truly believe that we all are going to end in a fiery apocalypse certainly will not act. It is entirely up to us. I hope I ask, I pray that we are all willing and that we will act while we still can. And let me say, we're headed in that direction ourselves. There is no future unless we act. Thank you.